And who would Howdy do, neighbor. It's Berean Spirits time once again. The boys have gathered around and they're ready for you. So join in, make comments, and study with the guys as they try to study as the Bereans did in Acts chapter 17. And now, here's the guys.
Chris, you're muted. You're muted. Oh, gotta love technical difficulties, don't we? Chris is muted, by the way, if you can't tell. He's trying to talk and introduce that this is Berean Spirits, but he is muted, and so you can't hear him. I mean, some may argue that he sounds better that way, but here it is. Chris, there you go.
Can you guys not hit that for me?
I was looking for it. It's been so long since I've done it that, I could have done it.
I think if you are muted yourself, we can't do it. But if we mute you, I think we might be able to unmute you.
Yeah, I don't know who muted me. I was talking to you guys before we started.
I
That's
know.
wild. Technical difficulties.
Indeed.
Yeah. Man, oh man. All right. Well, I guess we can try it again. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Berean Spirits. My name is Chris Peltz. I'm the evangelist with the Southside Church of Christ in Springfield, Missouri. Josh Thornhill back with us after a hiatus out in California.
That's right.
Man, I'm so glad you made it out, brother. Appreciate you.
Did you take a visa?
Did Oh no, you don't need ID. Well, maybe to get back from, but not to get in. But anyway, Josh Thornhill with the Westside Church of Christ over in Wichita, Kansas. You doing all right, brother? You have a good trip?
I had a good trip. I'm not sure about the preaching, but the trip was good. But
Yeah.
it's good to be back and then back on the show here with you guys. So
Yeah, we're glad to have you back for sure. It's just not the same for some reason
I know.
when you're gone.
Mm-hmm. Now you're just stuck with Richard all by
Yeah,
yourself.
we got Richard Dotson with the Kearney Church of Christ. Everybody knows him. Say hi. All right, let's move on. No, I'm just kidding. How you doing, Richard?
No, you ought to know.
I do know. You're doing good.
I am. We talk every day, so you know. I'm fine. Little wet.
Yeah.
Got a lot of rain.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
They were billing that up as some really big storm, and I think we
Weren't they?
barely got any rain.
I tell you what, though, it's kind of cool. Last night the Royals played through it, and it was kind of neat to see some of it. It was just so foggy. One ball got lost in the fog, but they played the game anyway. It was just just a foggy mist. But it was kind of weird to watch.
How'd they do?
Royals won. They
Wow.
had a 12-1 lead and they almost blew it. I think it was, what is it? I know the tying run was either on deck or come to the plate, 13 to something. But no, it didn't get that close. 13-9 or something. They had to bring in their closer.
Yeah.
And they didn't plan on that.
Crazy.
It was just weird to watch. I mean, to see that much, they were going out there pouring that. I really wondered what that stuff was. The ground crew put some type of powder on the dirt to help dry it out. I don't know what it is, but I was wondering about that last night.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, I don't know. It was just different to watch a ball game like that.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. Usually they'll delay or cancel, but. Oh, all right. Well, it's good to have everybody back with us today on Berean Spirits. Been some gospel meetings been happening, as everyone knows from last week. I was up in Kearney, and Josh was out in California but we are all back and together, and we're going to talk a little bit about the subject of debt, and what the scriptures teach concerning a Christian being in debt, and perhaps some things that you haven't thought of, and try to add some context to some of the passages that talk about this just a little bit. For example, in Romans chapter 13, verse 8, it says to owe no one anything. But, there's a little bit of context to that I think sometimes is missed. And, some folks can misapply some of that, in their study or in their understanding. But that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at that as well as a few other passages, and bring this into some spiritual teaching that is very important for us to understand. So, Richard, I'm going to start with you this morning as we get into this particular topic, because this is one that you've helped a lot of people through, just in past jobs, different things. And trying to navigate sometimes the idea of debt in their life.
Yeah. Navigate. I don't know if that's a good word, but I was a home builder, and I did work as a realtor before that, but and it merged together. But so yeah, there were some people that we had to get a loan for in order for them to buy a house. So yeah, did a little bit of that. What do you want to know about it?
No, I mean just the idea of Christians being in debt first and foremost. Some passages, some things to really look at and talk about as far as the idea of a Christian. What does the scriptures teach concerning the Christian and debt?
Oh, okay. Well, it's not something to be taken lightly. Um, in the Old Testament, there was rules about charging interest uh, toward the poor. That, of course, God was the one who was watching over the Israelites and things of that nature. They were allowed, for instance, in the Old Testament, to lend money to foreigners and charge interest, but those who were poor, they were not permitted to do that. But in the New Testament, yes, there's passages that talk about borrowing money, but there's also some principles about paying it back that we really have to consider before we think about getting in debt. Um, Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 7, and Chris and I talked about this yesterday or the day before. It's something that I've taught my son, and it says the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. And the only point I'm trying to bring up, and you can borrow money, but when you borrow money, you are selling a little bit of your freedom to the lender because you have to pay that back. And it makes it a very dangerous thing about getting in too much debt because, according to the parable of the sower, you're going to get caught up in, you're going to have too many earthly concerns. And if you have too many earthly concerns, you have to work at paying that money back. You have to pay that back. And that can cause you to be unfruitful. Example that I was telling Chris was, I've seen people who owed so much money, they had to work multiple jobs to pay off their debt. And in so doing, they were missing services at church. They were missing responsibilities that they had at church. And to me, that's one and the same as what we see talked about in the parable of the sower. And it had caused them to become unfruitful. And so while you can borrow money, you have to be very careful about that because once you borrow money from someone, you've lost a little bit of your freedom, and so you need to you're expected to pay that debt back. And so, with that being said, one has to show great wisdom in borrowing money to make sure that it's not going to consume them to cause them to be unfruitful.
Josh, go ahead.
I think that principle that Richard brings up is very important about the borrower is slave to the lender. You find it in places like Ephesians chapter 4, for instance, where Paul says that the one who steals is to steal no longer. Rather, he must labor, performing with his own hands what is good, so that he will have something to share with one who has needs. We have some obligations as far as our money is concerned. And I think there's three categories that we can put it in. We can spend it, and that's good within reason. I think God does, expect that we could enjoy the fruit of our labor and spend some of what we have received. It's also prudent to save, to save some of our money that we receive. And then there's the giving aspect. And that's what he talks about in Ephesians 4 and verse 28, giving to the one who has need. And the problem is when you're so stretched with debts of various kinds, you can, number one, you can't really spend anything, and then you can't give anything. And then you can't even save anything either, because you're giving all your money away to the lenders. And, you think about having to work so much just to pay your creditors. That's not a fun place to live in. But we want to recognize that we want to be good stewards of our money, and paying 28% interest or whatever those interest rates are anymore. I can't imagine that that's good stewardship. I wish we could get those returns on our money, but paying that in interest is not a great use of our money.
That's called like loan shark interest.
Yes. I mean, and that's the standard rate anymore, like 28, 29, 30, 31% interest on credit cards. I think that's what they're going for anymore, which is wild.
Did they not put a limit on that? Did that not pass? I thought they were going to put a limit on credit card interest.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. They need to do something for sure for a lot of people. Going back to that Romans chapter 13, verse 8, if you back up to verse 7, it talks about, paying your debts, right? Paying your taxes, paying, those that you owe money to, and if you owe someone something, giving it, making sure you pay it. And then it says there in verse 8 there to owe, to owe someone nothing. And it isn't that you can't have a loan that you're paying back. The idea is not to be getting behind, not to be overwhelmed, as Richard and Josh have both mentioned. The idea isn't that you can't ever take out a loan or have any type of debt, but getting it to where you're past due, getting it to where you're overdrawn, getting it to where you are in a position to where you can't pay that debt back, is the idea. And Josh brings up a good point about stewardship, right? Because not only are we to be good stewards of what God has blessed us with, we have obligations as far as, not only giving on the first day of the week, giving to those who are poor. We have obligations, for our families. We have obligations for our livelihoods, and too often we become so focused on the abundance of things that we spend ourselves out of the ability for the necessities of life, and that's where people get in so much trouble, because we live in a society that is promoting spending. You get degrees in marketing trying to get people to spend money and buy product, and they research this, and they spend billions of dollars, in research, trying to find out the best way to get people to spend money. And and they're going to charge as much as they possibly can. And the problems that Christians run into is that we become so focused and enamored with the latest and greatest, and trying to have things of this life that are beyond our necessities, that it causes us to lose focus, as Richard pointed out, upon what is truly important and the responsibilities we have as far as our service to God. Right now, I know Josh has brought up Dave Ramsey in times past, and everyone seems to focus upon him when it comes to money management and things. And he's got some great ideas, some great principles that he certainly promotes. But there are some things that sometimes for people are a little bit unrealistic as well. And, we live in a world that it's so difficult if you're going to have a home where you're not taking out a loan in order to have that. Um, and sometimes it's not reasonable even to have a vehicle that you don't have a loan on, for various reasons. But nevertheless, we live in a society that loaning money is a big business. And as Christians, we've got to be very careful in how it is we go about taking advantage of that and not going outside of our means.
Well, loaning money has always been a big business.
Mhm.
But be that as it may, there is passages that tells the righteous how to handle that. One is, you got to pay it back. Psalms 37:21. I don't know if Josh brought this one up, but it says the wicked borrows and does not repay. And so, none of us wants to be wicked. And so we read that verse and we say, okay, there we have a responsibility to pay back our debt, and that's going to take a lot of sacrifice and work. But yes, there are situations, where someone needs to borrow money in order to be able to conduct day-to-day affairs, and calamities happen. You could get a bad storm, for instance, and insurance is only going to pay so much in rebuilding. You're going to have to get a loan in order to build back what has been lost. And you may need that, to be able to provide necessities. It might just, for whatever reason, it might be a bad idea, but for the most part, it's probably a good idea. So whatever the idea is, there's going to be situations where lending, borrowing money for the Christian is of the utmost importance. However, yeah, I'll go back to saying that again. You cannot allow yourself to get consumed by it. That is the scary part, and you got to make sure that you are well within your means to be able to pay that back, or it will consume you. And remember, we're here working for the Lord. That's our job, and so I don't think anybody should ever go into debt without prayer. We should be going to the Lord in prayer, and asking for guidance, and looking at this, and seeing if that is something that the Lord wants us to do. But I would include him in that, because that's going to be a responsibility until you pay that money back.
Yeah, and that text you bring up is interesting because many would almost stop at after the first half of that verse, right? The wicked borrow money, and that's not what that text is saying. That the idea is the wicked are the ones who don't pay it back, and so that's the idea of what the thrust of that particular text is. And that's what we've got to be careful about, is making sure that we pay our debt, because we're all in debt, one way or however you want to look at it. There's going to be something. We're going to get to that in just a minute, but we are all in one way or another in debt. Josh, you got you want to add something else to that? And I'm going to go on to another text here.
No, go ahead.
So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. You know, we talk about physically, monetarily, you know, not, you know, going beyond our means and being careful with our debt and living to where you owe no one anything. But I want to go to a text in Romans chapter 1 in verse 14 where Paul says that he is a debtor to the Greek and the barbarian, the wise and the foolish, and to those who are in Rome also. And in that particular text, it's interesting because Paul is pointing out that he is indebted, right? He is under obligation, some translations may say. But the idea is a debt that is owed. And we've talked about this before. I think I mentioned it perhaps last week. But we go to a text like Romans 1, verse 14, again, understanding exactly what is being talked about, there are other passages that help us to have that understanding. And First John chapter 4, verse 11 is one of those passages that helps us to understand Romans 1:14. In First John chapter 4 and verse 11, it says there that for God so loved us, we ought to love one another. The word ought is the very same word that Paul uses in Romans 1:14, translated a debtor or under obligation. And it's interesting because Paul is claiming to be in debt, all right, owing something to someone who hasn't done anything for him. The Greeks never done anything for him. The barbarians didn't do anything for him, whether they were wise or foolish. You know, maybe there was one individual here or there, but as a group, they've done nothing for the Apostle Paul, and yet he says he's indebted to them. And 1 John 4, the idea is that, you know, we are indebted to our brethren. We ought to love. We owe it to our brethren to love them. And it's not because of anything brothers or sisters in Christ have done for us. It is because of the first part of that verse, God so loved us. That is why we are indebted to those around us, because of what God has done for us. And think about what he's done. What he has done with you know, through his son and our Savior King Jesus, you know, with the crucifixion, the resurrection, the bless, every spiritual blessing, all these things that God has done for us while we were yet sinners. And so we get an understanding of why God says we owe it. We are indebted, all right, not just to God, but to God's creation around us because of what he has done for us. Go ahead, Josh.
Amen. um,
Ditto.
Ditto. Yeah. I mean, I do think that there's a sense in which we are under that obligation or indebted to God and to one another. That's certainly true. But I also think that we need to recognize that indebting ourselves voluntarily in some cases is not always wise.
Yeah.
Not in the different sense. I'm talking about in the monetary sense again, you know, going back to that. There's some, like, I know you mentioned Dave Ramsey already. He talks about buying a house and he would prefer that you pay cash for it, but he's not going to get too upset at you if you, you know, get a mortgage on it. But a lot of people don't have the means to be able to save up hundreds of thousands of dollars to go and buy a house. They just don't. And so, I mean, that is I think that's one of those things that they call good debt. That they, you know, that is generally, it is debt, but it is a good purchase that you're making. I think partly because you're going up in value. It is an investment, and so although you owe against it, it is increasing in value. Other things, not so much. And so we need to be careful that, you know, we don't allow the marketing and such around us to cause us to forget that our greatest obligation is to God and not to the marketing companies or the credit companies that are giving us money in order to buy whatever it is that we want to buy.
You know,
Yeah.
if I can say, I think what you just mentioned about having good debt, I would think what Paul had was a good debt.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, be that as it may, that's the type of debt we should all be seeking. And I think we should all be in agreement for. That's a necessity. That should be a priority, is to have that debt in your life to where you have to pass the gospel on to those who are in need of it. That's something that we should want. But the principle still remains the same. We have to pay that debt. That is something that is expected of the Christian. And so for us to ignore that debt or to treat it sloppily, that's not good. And that goes back to what we read before about the wicked not repaying their debt. If I am lax in paying my house payment, for instance, if I don't send in my payments regularly, I'm going to hear from them. There's going to be penalties. It's just going to get messy. All right. I think anybody that's ever had debt problems knows about that type of mess and how that can reflect badly upon you. Number one, Christians should have ideally good credit ratings. We all should have good credit ratings, ideally. I'm not saying things don't come up, but for the most part, with not counting some things that happen in your life that are beyond your control, we should have good credit ratings. It reflects on our reputation. And so likewise, I want to take that and now apply that to our responsibility towards the Greeks and the Romans, as Chris read, from Paul. If we are not showing ourselves able to pay, if we are not showing ourselves willing to pay, and if we are not paying, all right, that shows a sloppiness, and that's going to hinder our reputation. So being able to pay means you're going to be able to give an answer to every man who gives you, wanting a reason for the hope that lies within you. You're going to study. You're going to make sure you can teach the gospel to the lost. And as Paul told the Hebrews, there's a time you ought to be teachers. That is something that is expected. And so we're going to have to pursue that aspect of it to make sure that we are able to pay our debts. And then number two, as I said, we have to be willing to pay our debts. And that means we got to go. That's what was said in the Great Commission, right? Go into all the world, as he told his disciples, his apostles. But he said, go into all the world. Well, we have to go in order to be able to pay this debt that we owe our Lord. And so we have to go and to make an attempt to teach our neighbors, our friends, our lost. So many times people say, why isn't the church growing today? Maybe we're not going. I mean, that's something to consider. How are we handling this debt? And so when we're thinking about that, we're going to have to make sure that we treat this debt, as Josh said, very serious, and pursue what needs to be pursued in order to be able to pay this off. Because as we already read, the wicked do not repay their debts. We don't want to be referred to as being wicked or owing the Lord on the day of judgment.
One of the things you had mentioned in one of your previous comments was not taking on any type of debt without prayer, first and foremost. And, when you think about the idea of praying, and you think about the idea of even monetary debt. One of the things we can ask ourselves is, how can I glorify God with this? And you think, well, I'm buying a house. How's that going to glorify God? Well, we're to be hospitable to one another. We're to show hospitality. We are to, to help foreigners and strangers. We are to be kind to those who are less fortunate, and a home can be used for that, right? How is a loan that we're going to take out for one reason or another? How is God going to be glorified in that, or how can we glorify God in that? And if we can't think of a reason, then maybe we ought to rethink, first of all, that particular loan, that item, or the reason we're getting into debt, or even what our priorities really are, right? And listen, we're not. I don't think any of us are standing up here and saying that, because I'm certainly not saying that we've never taken on debt, we've never had loans, we've never used credit cards. I mean, we're not saying that we've never done any of these things, but at the same time, we understand the reality and the responsibility of taking on such debt or responsibility, and making sure that we are in a position to repay it. And a lot of times those who are young, are a little bit less um, uh, strict. Not, I don't know. That's really not the word I'm looking for, but disciplined, perhaps. As you get older, you kind of get a little bit more of that, hopefully. But at the same time, we need to, first and foremost, through prayer, maybe we could ask ourselves the question, how am I going to glorify God? And that goes to the idea of Paul being in debt. I can glorify God. Remember in Philippians 1, verse 12, even in these chains, they help to, for the furtherance of the gospel. Because regardless of his situation and circumstances, he spread the gospel wherever he was at. And is this going to help us with that, or is this going to hinder us with that? Josh?
Yeah, I mean, if we're so busy, like Richard pointed out, if we're so busy working because we're trying to pay off our debts that we can't, share the gospel, that's not a good position to be in. But then there's something to be said about, I think, the instant gratification side of things. Because we live in an instant gratification society where everything is instant anymore. You get it as soon as you want it. In some places, you can go to, I think California is this way in certain things. You can go on to Amazon and you can order something and it'll be there the same day at your door. I mean, mine's not, sometimes I can get it to where it's the next day, but usually I can't get things the same day in some places. But that's another discussion. But anyway, that illustrates the instant gratification of our society, how we want things and we want them now. That's why the instant streaming services are so popular, because I get all this at my fingertips. But then, well, aside from that, you have the buying things on credit when you don't have the money for it. It enables you to have something now, whereas on the other side of that, if you were to save up and pay for it, save up money to get it, you've got all that time to think about it. And then I've heard about people who have decided they wanted something, they started saving up for it, they have the money, and then they go to the store to buy it, and then they're thinking, I don't really want this. I changed my mind. And so it gives you that time to reflect and to honestly evaluate to see if this is really something worthwhile. Whereas if you use credit, you already have it, and you could maybe return it. You maybe sell it and not get as much as you paid for it, but regardless, you make different choices when you buy versus, on credit versus saving up to pay for it yourself. So
Yeah.
I mean,
There's actually psychological studies that have been done on this and how it's much harder for someone to pay cash for something than it is to swipe a card. Psychologically, there's something that in a person that when they go to purchase something, if it's with a card, it's just easier. But yet when they go to hand over the cash, there's that hesitation. There's that, do I really want to spend this money on that thing? And that there, so it's interesting when you talk about that idea that people stop and reconsider that, especially over time. I've done this long without it. Can I go long even longer without it? But that psychological aspect of it, when you're actually handing over the money right then and there, as opposed to just swiping a card and having little payments later.
right. And they say that actually activates the pain receptors. That's part of that psychological reality. Is it's activating those pain receptors, which is why it hurts to do it, but you don't feel that when you're just swiping the card. You notice anymore, a lot of vending machines have credit card, readers so that you can buy your snack or your Coke or whatever with a credit card. And what they found is the average, purchase is significantly more when I'm using my credit card, because I've got my credit card. I can buy the Coke and I can buy the Skittles and I can buy the bag of chips down there. But if I only got $1, I'm limited as to what I can buy. And so there is a lot of wisdom in, not using or having access to all your money with a card. I'm not saying don't use a debit card or a credit card or something, but just know that there's psychological studies that have been done. And we talk about marketing. These credit card companies know what they're doing. There's a reason why you go look at the corporate building for Bank of America or SoFi. SoFi has sponsored that football stadium out in LA. They didn't do that just for just because they just happened to get like they did that off the backs of their customers who have paid them interest on their debts. And then same with Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase, Citibank, all these other banks. They have these massive skyscrapers because you're paying them interest. So they're in it to make money, and they know how to manipulate people in order to spend more, in order to borrow more. Like I've gotten tons of. I actually just got one this morning from my bank telling me that buy now, pay later is an option.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to use it, but I mean, it's an option. I have it now. So.
Yeah.
Well, I really want to get, I really want to hit something I think is really important. And I think it goes into this, and that's having the right mindset. Because if you have the right mindset as a Christian, you're not going to get caught up into what Josh is talking about. You're not going to fall for those tricks. And now let me explain that. In the parable of the sower, in verse 22, when Jesus was explaining the parable of the sower, he said, now he who received seed among the thorns is he who hears the word and cares of this world, and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful. Now that becomes our enemy as a Christian. We do not want to be unfruitful. And so when we're thinking about the cares of this world, that should automatically trigger something in us that says, hey, I got to be extremely careful with this, because this can cause me to be an unworthy servant, to not pay back the debt that Paul referred to, that he owed the Greeks and the Romans. Now, if you go to Acts chapter 20, I think when Paul had called the Ephesian elders and he was going to say farewell to them, he makes some comments here that I don't think that we can overlook. First, in verse 33, he said, I have coveted no one's silver or gold or apparel. So coveting is wrong. And so if you find yourself wanting to borrow and making yourself unfruitful because of covetousness, well, be that as it may, you are going to pay for that covetousness, but still you have done something that's going to hinder you and your ability to be fruitful in the Lord's kingdom. And notice, Paul's remedy for this. He said, my hands have provided for my necessities and those who are with me. In verse 35, he said, I have shown you in every way by laboring like this, you must support the weak and remember the words of the Lord Jesus that he said it is more blessed to give than to receive. And so having said that, these are instincts that instead of using a credit card, we need to control, and that to remember that that is affecting our work as a Christian. Now, the Apostle Paul earlier made reference to that debt that he owed the Greeks and the Romans. And notice what he said to the Ephesian elders that I think is just so revealing. He said in verse 26 and 27, I testify to you this day that I am innocent of the blood of all men, for I am not shunned to declare to you the whole counsel of God, meaning he had paid that debt. All right, what he owed them, he gave them. And this refers back to Ezekiel, when the Lord made Ezekiel a watchman, and the Lord had charged Ezekiel that if he told him something to tell the people, and that he didn't warn them about what the Lord had said, that their blood would be on his hands. In other words, they may not repent of the sin because they don't know about it. They're still going to pay, but he's going to be a partaker in that with them. And so what Paul's making reference to is this debt that he owes. And he says, I am innocent of the blood of all men, being that his hands were clean. He had paid the debt. He had done his responsibility. And so we have to understand, we have to shun covetousness. We can't go for those types of things. Our first priority has to be fruitful in the Lord's kingdom. And that means we have to repay the debt that we owe the Greeks and Romans by preaching, declaring the whole counsel of God. If we do that, then we can say that we're free of debt. But until that happens, and that's not going to happen because there's a lot of people in this world. We got to be busy making sure that we are fruitful. So those things that you may want to put on your credit card and borrow money for, you have to ask yourself, is that because of covetousness, or is this because of necessity? Is this something I can work with my hands and provide for myself and for others? Because every time you borrow money, again, you are taking away something that can be given to the Lord to make yourself more fruitful in the Lord's kingdom. So yes, should Christians pay their debts? That's a question we're asking. Yes, but our biggest debt is to Jesus Christ, and we owe him everything. We have to make sure that we pay that debt that we owe in spreading the gospel.
Absolutely. Yeah, a great point. Josh, you got any last thoughts for us today?
I think Richard's on it. Just make sure you're not developing a material focused spirit that'll lead you into more and more debt. Just focus on being a faithful steward of what God has given you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Last thoughts, Richard? Anything else you want to add?
No, I think I hit it. On that
Yeah,
last
folks,
point.
we do appreciate everybody who tunes in and listens to Berean Spirits. Remember, you can catch this as a podcast as well. You can search Berean Spirits on your favorite podcast app. Be sure and share it out. Make sure everybody that you know knows about Berean Spirits and our live stream every Thursday morning, 10 o'clock Central Standard Time. And of course, you can catch it on both YouTube, on Facebook, and the podcast as well. Be sure and shoot us an email, bereanspirits@gmail.com, if you got questions or something you want us to cover. Until next time, remember to search the scriptures with Berean Spirits.
Well, folks, that's all for today. Don't worry. Lord willing, the guys will be back next week for another Bible study on Berean Spirits. Until then, let the guys hear from you. Drop them some email at bereanspirits@gmail.com. They'd love to hear from you. Until next time, let's keep studying that Bible.